The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general, informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for joining me again this week. Glad to have you here. This week, we are sort of returning to our Scientology roots. We are doing an interview this week with a former Scientologist, a woman who was raised in it and who has a very, very interesting story. So interesting, in fact, that she has recently written a book, which will be released soon, the title of which is Clearly Lies Are True. I like that title. and her name is, full name here is Pamela Nickel Williams. We're going to call her Pam here. Pam, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me on your show. As you know, I'm a little nervous, but this is an exciting interview for me, and that this is the first time that I've shared my story out loud.
Exactly. And that's why I'm so happy to have you here and I'm happy that you reached out to me for this opportunity. I'm always so pumped to be, kind of the first person to get somebody's story out there. It's not a status thing, but it's just a help thing. You know what I mean? I like being there for people. And I remember when I first told my story and how nerve-wracking that is. And so I first want to say, really well done for doing this, for stepping up, writing a book. It takes courage to do this. This isn't something everybody can do. So let's start off on that foot. And again, welcome to my podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. And you've made it such a safe space, so I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm doing my best. I really want this to be a smooth experience for you. And I hope that the audience, is as fascinated by you and your story as I am. I think it's really quite something. Let's go ahead and I guess just get right into it. We are talking here about a Scientology-related story. I've worn my Xenu t-shirt today for that. And all right, so basically your parents were heavily involved in the early days of Dianetics and Scientology, and were actually, if I understand your story right, were even rubbing elbows with L. Ron Hubbard during different points of this. So I guess we should kind of go back to the beginning and just, where do you want to start?
Well, I think I'll start at the beginning. So right. With their involvement. Yeah. So in 1950, my dad read Dianetics.
Wow.
And he was hooked. And so he started attending the lectures and the training and everything in Wichita. And that's where L. Ron Hubbard was at the very beginning after the release of Dianetics. And so he was involved there. And that's before he met my mother. And then anybody who knows the history of Scientology knows that went under financially. Hubbard lost money, and there was a whole business deal that went bad. And so then he moved to D.C. So he took his show on the road and went to Washington, D.C. And so my father, in the meantime, had met my mother, and they had gotten married in 1955. And by 1957, they were living in D.C., and they were at the founding Church of Scientology there. And they were there for 3 years, 57, 58, 59, before Hubbard left and went to England, to St. Hill. So they worked there. They were involved there. It was the Hubbard Association of Scientologists at the time. In writing my book and really in researching this, I found fascinating documents that I never even knew existed, which are really old editions of The Auditor, which was that very beginning magazine, that Scientology published. And I found at the Congress in 1958, which my parents helped put on with Hubbard and a small crew of people. They had very specific roles. My dad was a seminar leader, and then my mother was, an organizer and a business manager, and they were very heavily involved and rubbed elbows. I mean, they worked side by side, with L. Ron Hubbard and his brother, Nibs Hubbard, who...
his son Nibs.
Say it again.
That was L. Ron Hubbard's son.
Son, I'm so sorry, not his brother, his son. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. Yes. Yeah. His brother. So, L.
Ron Hubbard Jr.
Exactly. Yeah. My parents, my mom always referred to him as Nibs. And I remember I didn't get who he was.
Yeah. He was one of Hubbard's first, real inner circle power players, and was actually really involved in the formation of a lot of the stuff. Some people have even said he was the one who wrote the issue about the training routines. Nibs, he was very, very involved with Scientology back then, and your parents were working with him. I mean, this is inner circle L. Ron Hubbard stuff here. This is really something.
Yeah, it really was. It was a grassroots. I mean, that's the only way I can think of it. That it was just this very exciting grassroots movement that was happening at that time. And it was late 50s. We hadn't quite got to the 60s yet, and they found it. And knowing my parents and just the little bit that they talked about it during that period of time, I mean, it was so little, I wasn't even born until, 58, I was born. But as a young child, I remember them talking about it, and it was exciting for them.
Yeah.
They felt a part of something that was exciting and new and big, that they thought would be big.
Right. Well, in its own way, I suppose it was.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, cool. So after the 50s, when Hubbard went over to England and purchased the St. Hill property and started operating out of St. Hill as the international headquarters, did your folks stay in Washington through the 60s, or what was their involvement after Hubbard took off?
Yeah. So I think they had to make a decision. Sadly, my parents are both deceased, so I haven't been able to, go to them to ask a lot of the questions that you're asking, and that I have as well. So I had to do a lot of research and just kind of put the pieces together. So what I know is, I was born in 1958. I was actually born, I think Arthur Hubbard, Ron's youngest son, was born in June, and I was born the following fall. So we're very close in age. So that's kind of funny. Yeah. They were pregnant. Mary Sue Hubbard and my mom were pregnant at the same time. So that was strange.
That is funny.
So it is, yeah. So after Ron left, my parents stayed through 59. And then a lot of the people that were involved in Scientology and the HAS, or the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, had to make some decisions. Were they going to stay, or were they going to, do something else? And so there were two people, John and Millie Galusha, who were very involved in Scientology. And at the time, people started to branch out and create franchises.
Right.
And so that was acceptable at that time.
They weren't called missions yet, which is what they're called now, the franchise system of selling the rights to use Dianetics and Scientology. But they were originally a little bit more open about it. It was called franchises. It wasn't so religiously oriented. Oh, yes, this is a Scientology mission. We're expanding our religious footprint, right? It was a little bit more openly about the money. I'm curious if I could interject for just a second in the time stream here. We're kind of chronologically going through your story, and you've barely arrived on the scene yet as a baby, but I'm curious from this time period, what did your parents say, or how did they talk about what Hubbard was like working with him during those times at a Congress or at the Washington Founding Church? Did they ever talk about him as a person?
Yes and no. So they revered him.
Did they?
They definitely revered him. Okay. Yeah, they definitely revered him. I think from my perception, and I was a young child, and so, I can't tell you, everything that they said. I can speculate. But what I remember as I got older was that they had fond memories of that period of time and working side by side. I think that my father also felt that he was important to L. Ron Hubbard. I think he had this sense of L. Ron Hubbard, appreciated him. L. Ron Hubbard was interested in him, that he had this tight connection with him, which I doubt was true from everything that I've learned about L. Ron Hubbard. I think he was incapable of relationships like that.
Yeah.
And people have, there's lots of testaments to that.
Yes.
People have memorialized that a lot. So I think that they were swept up in the movement. And because of that, and because they worked so closely with him, they felt they had a relationship with him, and why they continued to follow him. They weren't ready to move across the Atlantic Ocean, though. They weren't ready to do that. And so because they had these friends that were creating a franchise and were moving to Denver, actually Golden, Colorado. I know, not too far from you.
That's right.
They followed them.
Okay.
And so that was the way that they could stay in Scientology.
Got it. Okay. So y'all came to Denver, and you were just a young, strapping lass.
That's about three or four.
3 or 4 moving to Colorado. And okay, so you grew up here. What happened here with your folks and their Scientology experience?
Yeah. So I have some memories. I was little, so I have some memories of visiting the Galushas, John and Millie Galusha, after the franchise was established, and that my parents saw them. They had children. I remember kind of playing with their children. But really, from my perspective, we were the 1960s dream. So it was the tract home that was built that my parents were able to purchase. We lived not too far from a mountain that I actually realized, I did some research, is named Tabletop Mountain. Mm-hmm. It's, Mm-hmm. I thought my mom just called it that, but it's an actual place because I remember seeing it from my backyard.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. So they, they started to grasp that American dream, so my dad, got a job. He was always working in the aerospace industry from what I remember, but I'm not sure if that's where he worked when we were in Denver. I don't really know. Okay. My mom stayed at home. She was a mom, a housewife. So we were there for several years. We left when I was 6. So they stayed there for several years. And like I said, from the little recollection that I have of visiting the Galushas, I believe that they were involved in the franchise and in Scientology, but not to the degree that they had been involved, in DC.
Right.
Because it changed. The whole situation changed with Ron leaving, and, now everyone was starting to flock to St. Hill. That started. And the only thing that was happening in the States, were these franchises that were being built or being established. Right.
Just to set the scene for folks, also, just from my knowledge of this too, you had through the 1950s, as you mentioned, and I've never used this word to describe the growth of Scientology in the 50s, but grassroots is fitting as far in terms of the excitement on the ground, and people were organizing and trying to build something up. And it was the pattern of Scientology in different locations that would sort of happen until Hubbard would come along and sort of mess it all up, was sort of the repeating pattern of operation. And he would kind of come in and take all the money and then that kind of thing. He was really into that. But somehow it sort of plodded along and grew, and organizations, churches started forming up in places like Hawaii, in Arizona and DC and different locations. London had been set up in the early 50s. And Hubbard traveled around, as you mentioned, in 1958, and every year, in fact, through the 50s, there were 2 what were called congresses that were held, where people would fly in from all over to hear Ron do a series of lectures, but also there would be workshops and seminars, and other people would be involved in leading these things and stuff like that. It was a real event. And it was like a weekend kind of, 2, 3, maybe even 4-day thing. we have the lectures, preserved from those times and transcripts and stuff, but it was a real kind of thing that these were the things that Scientologists did to get together. So after the 60s, after Hubbard moved to St. Hill, it changed, as you mentioned, and the whole sort of how Scientologists got together and heard from Ron became different because he started lecturing out of St. Hill, and he didn't really leave there very often. I think he gave 2 or 3 congresses through the 1960s, not very many. The whole thing shifted, and all the importance went to England and where he was. Right. Just to build on what you were talking about there.
Yeah, no, that's great background in that. Yeah. And maybe to piggyback on that. So at the Congress in 1958, which is in Washington, D.C., I found some artifacts in the Auditor, the famous Scientology magazine, about that Congress. And at that Congress, my dad was one of a handful. So maybe, I have the list here, maybe like 15 people that received their clear bracelets from Hubbard.
Wow. He was one of those guys. I remember that Congress. I remember reading about that. That's interesting. Yeah,
he was one of those guys, Paul Nickel. Wow. And he received his clear bracelet, which he wore proudly his entire life.
Wow. You also mentioned having a copy of that, an original copy of that old Science or Survival transcript, which was typed with the notes on it. And I had to laugh because I may have seen photographs of maybe not the book that you have and the chart that you have. The Science of Survival book comes with this very large chart that sort of charts emotions and characteristics of behavior. And we had, at one point I was doing proofreading in Scientology of that book. And we went all the way back to the original works, and they had photographs of them, of that chart, and it was typed out. Every block was its own little typed thing. And I never really forgot about that. I don't get a chance to talk about it very often, but when you mentioned you had an original copy of that book and chart, I thought, oh yeah, I think I saw that. It's old stuff, the original stuff. It's a little different than how it is now. They changed a few things. Yeah.
Yes, very different. Yeah. And Hubbard's personal message in the back, they were really like almost practitioners, it was almost like a medical book, that you would be reading to learn how to practice Dianetics.
That's right. That was how he modeled it in the early days, as he was trying to do that whole scientific doctoral approach to it until he got ridiculed enough and realized he needed to go the religious route. So, so that was, it was, but the model in the beginning, the first 2 years, he was trying to be so sciencey, and it's almost, if it wasn't so destructive, it would almost be cute because he's trying so hard and he fails so badly. He just doesn't have a scientific bone in his body, but it's really something watching him sort of trying to cosplay it, being a scientist. Yes. Anyway, let's get back to your narrative. I just wanted to kind of ask about those things. So, okay, so we're in the 1960s here now. You're a young woman growing up in Colorado here, and then you guys left. You moved?
Right. So I'm 6. I'm a child. And I'm not sure why, Chris. I've done all my research and tried to figure it out. My parents, like I said, didn't really, we were kids. So we didn't get an explanation.
Of course, you're 6 years old, of course.
This is just what's happening, right? So they moved to Louisiana, just to a little town outside of New Orleans called Slidell. Oh. And the only thing that I could find in researching, for my story was that there were some plants being built, assembly plants. One was the Michoud, Michoud assembly plant, and it was being built. And that was an aerospace plant that was helping to build rockets during the early 1960s and part of the, space race and the NASA movement. And so because of my dad being a technical writer, and he went on in his career to work for Lockheed, and that's really where he worked for most of the rest of his career after Slidell, I'm pretty sure that's why we moved.
Job opportunity type
job
thing.
opportunity. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because there wasn't much going on in Scientology in Slidell, Louisiana, in 1962 or 63.
Well, to be honest, there wasn't a whole lot of Scientology going on in Golden either. It wasn't like Denver was a Scientology hotspot. In fact, you mentioned in your write-up, you reminded me that the Galushas actually became what were known in Scientology as squirrels. They went off and did their own thing called Identics. And I remember hearing about this because Hubbard was incensed enough about it that he actually wrote this issue declaring these people as squirrels, meaning they were taking his work and running off and doing something else with it. And he never appreciated that.
Yeah. I remember my parents talking about that. Yeah, I do remember that. And, John Galusha and Millie Galusha were so tight, during the beginning years with Hubbard. I mean, there's pictures of them. If you go back and look at, old magazines, The Auditor, and there's lots of artifacts about them. And then John even went to St. Hill and studied there. Yeah, either before or after he set up his franchise, or maybe during that period of time. I don't know the exact timeline. So yeah, for him to create his own tech, was pretty sacrilegious, right?
Yeah, very much so. And again, maybe another kind of pattern that more than a couple of people over the years, especially in the 50s and 60s, fell into with Hubbard, is they would become enamored with him and follow him and become very much a follower of Dynamics and Scientology. But then at something would happen. Hubbard would piss them off, or they'd run into some disagreement or some problem with the tech or with the methods. And then they would kind of think, oh, well, I have a better idea. And then they would start changing it. And Hubbard just couldn't ever deal with that. He couldn't, if he couldn't take your better idea and claim it for his own and incorporate it into Scientology himself, he would, if you insisted on owning your own idea, he would throw you under the bus, was basically how I understood it to work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. Although my parents did keep in touch with the Galushas, over the years.
Did they?
Christmas cards, things like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
I remember that.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, in the 60s, of course, you didn't even have a suppressive person until 67 when that officially became a thing. And I think it took quite a few years before that really started catching on with at the public level of Scientology. We all know Scientology does this at the drop of a hat now, but back then it was a very different situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Well, okay, so let's carry on. So so you guys moved to Louisiana. So I guess Scientology was pretty much completely out of your life to some degree at that point, or what was your experience of it growing up? And by the way, were your parents using any of this with you guys, with the family as kids? I mean, I had experiences with that, but what was yours?
Right. So yes and no. I don't have a lot of memories of that in Denver, but in Slidell, I remember touch assists. They definitely, were big on those. When you fall down and scrape your knee, they give you the Scientology touch assist. I became very used to the terminology. They spoke as Scientologists. They talked about, like key terms I always think of, like, we have an agreement about this. You wouldn't say, like we agreed to this, but like we have an agreement, listening to my parents talk, using the word communication in a very specific way, talking about overts, things that you've done, omissions, things that you're hiding, all of those kinds of words became part of my vocabulary or I shouldn't say I used them, but became part of my, knowledge base. I understood what those words meant as a very young child, which is kind of weird.
Very. It reminds me that I remember one time when I was 11 years old, I told my mom in shock after hearing someone who wasn't a Scientologist use the word communication. I had just about fallen out of my chair because the only people I ever heard talk about communication were Scientologists. I thought growing up it was a Scientology word, only to have my mom laughing at me, at 11, no, Chris, it's a regular word. And I was like, well, I didn't know. So yeah, they definitely have their own way of using these words though. And they, there are their own little twists to it. Did you have exposure to, during the 60s, at least during the Louisiana time, did you have, well, no, you wouldn't have, it wouldn't have come up yet with any of the study tech or misunderstood words or any of that stuff yet, right?
No, not until the 70s. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or later 60s. Yeah,
Yeah.
later 60s. So yeah, while we were in Louisiana, I really think, and I learned this through the writing of my story. And I found some writing that my mother had done later, and we can talk about that in the 70s too. But what I found were that she had been trying hard to get my dad to get out of Scientology. She really had started to, change her mind. Oh. And so moving to Louisiana, she embraced Southern suburbia. She embraced, it was culture shock. I mean, moving from Denver to the South, we weren't exactly warmly received,
right?
As non-Southerners. But again, an opportunity to, have a home, to live in suburbia, all of that for my father to make more money. And so on the back burner always was my father pushing Scientology. That was always on the back burner. And my mother had to, almost like a dance, she had to kind of appease him, but she also kept trying to move further away from it and to distance herself from it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a really sad situation, honestly, I think, for her. And, in the 1960s, women didn't have a lot of clout in a marriage.
Couldn't even get credit cards.
Right. I mean, she did not.
Yeah.
She did not. She was under the thumb of, the finances and all of that, and running the home and, taking care of kids. And she played bridge. They tried to make friends. I mean, she really tried to embrace, that Southern life. Were really a lot of my memories there. So not much about Scientology until we left for St. Hill.
Oh, you all got up and took off to St. Hill.
Not all of us.
Oh, okay.
Not all of us.
What happened?
So, yeah. I think that my dad was going to come, but he didn't. So there was, like I said, my dad always on the back burner of, Scientology, reading the Auditor, talking about it, things that they needed to be doing, but they weren't doing, as far as training and auditing and everything that was happening over there in St. Hill. And my mom and me, and I have a younger brother, we all went over to St. Hill, and my dad stayed home and worked. He stayed back in Slidell.
Wow.
So I don't know if he was supposed to come.
Right. The most dedicated one of you stays home and the others go off to Ron's home. Wow.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Must have been rough for your mom.
Yeah, I think it was hard for, I think she was torn. I think there was a part of her, like I remember like her buying new outfits, like to go on the trip. And like, I think there was part of her that wanted to have that excitement maybe in her life, of what it had been in DC. But then on the other hand, she was very rooted, in being a housewife and, making a home and doing all of those things. So I think she was always torn as a mother between those two. I really felt that as a child, that she really wasn't being fulfilled. It didn't fulfill her, the motherhood that she had. And so she really wanted something more. And Scientology was the thing that was there.
Right. So even if she wasn't super pumped about it, her husband was, and this was in her life, and there had been good times. So maybe something could come of this. Is that kind of the attitude?
I think so. And I think, as we, as humans, like if we have a good experience or an experience that we have good memories of, we think that going back to that is going to create those same good memories.
Absolutely.
And I think that was really probably her mindset. which sadly didn't happen.
Okay.
It was a different beast by the time she got to St. Hill.
It was, wasn't it? Because it was, I mean, we talk about how Scientology was so different in the 70s compared to how draconian it became through the 80s and 90s with Miscavige's takeover. And yet, if you go back in time a little bit to the 50s and 60s, you have the same degree of massive change in how Scientology was thought of by its adherents, how it was delivered, the seriousness with which it was taken by Hubbard and its proponents. I mean, a lot of things were changing during those early years as well. And 60s is when, you know, the suppressive person thing comes out and the ethics stuff comes out and the Sea Org. I mean, your guys are going to St. Hill in 67 just as Hubbard is going off on the ocean to start the Sea Org and stuff.
Right.
Big changes.
We were, we were in, St. Hill during 67.
Yeah.
And so my mom waited for us to get out of school. So we went in the summer there.
Okay.
And we were there pretty much through the summer. My mom was off at St. Hill, taking the St. Hill briefing course.
So, Wow. So she actually went there to do this great, big, huge auditor course that Hubbard had been personally delivering for years over there. This is the biggest course in Scientology, and they don't really do it now, but back then it was the biggest thing going. I mean, and you're literally going to Hubbard's home to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. With all these other, Scientologists that are flocking there.
Right.
So yeah, it was a thing.
Yeah, it was one of the single most successful times and periods that Scientology ever had.
Right.
Was that time period, and you went right in the middle of it. So I'm all ears here. Please tell me what it was like. What are your memories of going to St. Hill?
Yeah, I wish I had memories of I wish I had been. I don't really wish I had been on the St. Hill briefing course, but I wish I knew what happened there. I only know a little bit about it, but I know it cost a lot of money. And doing my research, at the time it was $1,000, to take that course, which seems like nothing now. But in 1967, that was a lot of money.
That's right.
Plus, my parents had to pay for lodging, food, transportation, all of that.
It's like going to Flag now in Clearwater. It's basically like that kind of an experience.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good parallel. Yeah. So we flew on a double-decker, bus. I mean, not bus, airplane bus.
Aerobus, as they say in Europe.
Exactly. There you go. A Delta double-decker. So I remember that,
Wow.
I remember going up the little stairs and sitting with my mom, looking out the window, drinking 7-Up in a cup. And so it was exciting, I was excited.
How old were you at this point?
So at that point I was 9.
Okay. All right, cool.
So I was 9 years old. So, a little more aware of what was going on, that this was something, how my mom was feeling about it. And so when we got there, though, so we went into, because, East Grinstead is right outside of St. Hill. So we got into Tunbridge Wells, which is the little town there, right outside of that. And so we stayed at the Harewood Hotel, which has since been renamed. I've done all my research and tried to find it. And, I've seen pictures and I'm like, I think that was it, but they've redecorated. So it was a small hotel there, and a lot of Scientologists stayed there. So it was a hub, for coming over. And so when we got there, my parents had arranged, with whom I don't know, but someone at St. Hill, that my mom would have a kitchen and a fridge, and, she'd be able to cook. And she had this vision that she'd be able to still do all the things she did at home, plus then take this St. Hill briefing course. So probably some unrealistic expectations.
Probably. It sounds like it. Yeah.
It sounds like it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But like I said, I think in her mind, that's how she wanted it to go. So of course, when we got there, she was crestfallen. She went into the hotel room. It was this small room, and, if you've been to England, the fridges are so minuscule, they're teeny tiny, right?
Yeah. Everything is tiny plate over there. It's tiny.
Everything's tiny, right? Yeah. And so there was a hot plate and this teeny tiny fridge and this very small room with, I don't even think, enough beds, for me and my brother and my mom.
Wow.
So she called my dad and was not happy was not happy about any of it and said, you have to do something. You have to write this, you have to make this right. So how that happened, I don't know. But we ended up in this very large room, which must have been like a suite by Harewood Hotel standards for all of us. And
bloody Americans.
Right.
All
exactly.
your demands.
Which I'm sure they paid a pretty penny for.
Yeah.
I'm sure parents had to pay more, for that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what happened when we first got there. My mom went off, and was with the Scientologists. They had the buses that would take them, or the vans, that would take them to St. Hill. So she'd get up and, do breakfast and coffee and then go out. And sometimes my brother and I were at the hotel, I believe, by ourselves, from my memories.
Wow. And this is your younger brother.
Yes.
So you're 9 and he's younger and you're just alone there.
It's about 3.5 years difference. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have some memories of that.
Okay.
But told to stay, in the room, which is what I remember.
Yep.
There was a little garden outside but you really couldn't go out there unless, my mom was there. So she did that for a little bit. And then somehow she found childcare for us. And I believe it was in East Grinstead, but it may have been in Tunbridge Wells. I'm not sure, where exactly we went. But we went to this lovely young woman's home. And she was probably maybe in her early 20s. She was a young mom, had a little baby. Her husband worked during the day. And she had a very English house with a little garden in the back, where berries grew and we could run and everything. And I have really fond memories of going there, really fond memories. And there was a little boy who was there with us. His parents were Scientologists and he was from South Africa. So I do remember that. So my mother must have found somehow daycare, through the other Scientologists that she met. And so we did that. And I was sad. I was sad to leave there every day because we had so much freedom there. We weren't in school.
Right.
We got to play. We ran around the garden. It was the first time I picked raspberries and gooseberries off the vine and, just had a lot of freedom. And she had a baby and I liked to play with dolls. And so I loved this little baby that I got to, play with. And so those were good times.
That's nice.
So that was okay.
Were you cognizant of the fact that you were in a whole different country, everybody talking different and the food being different? Was that an experience for you at 9 years old?
Very much so. So that's a good question. Yeah. So in the hotel, so the very first night we were there, we went to dinner. And so we're sitting there with all these Scientologists and, the food is very different. And so they served fish. So the fish is on the platter, scales and all, eyeball and all, tail and all, right? on a lovely bed of lettuce. And even my mom, I remember she took the lettuce and she covered the eye. She didn't want it staring at her, and she looked at me and my brother, and it's like, okay, they're not going to eat this. So we got to eat trifle. That was what we had for dinner, which is like dessert. So it's like sponge cake with whipped cream, with jelly, and, it's yummy. Yeah, it was delicious. And so we got to eat trifle. And because that was really all, we could find on the menu that, I liked and then my brother liked, she would have it sent to the hotel room, in the evening. So sometimes she'd go and have dinner, with a Scientologist. And so she'd send that to the hotel room and my little brother and I would eat that. And we'd drink lots of tea with lots of sugar and cream.
Wow.
So I remember that. Yeah. Wow. I remember loving that. And then, the accents were different, definitely. Yeah. And listening to everyone. And although I thought it was lovely. I really I was very fascinated by it as a kid. Yeah. And knew it was so different. But she did enroll us in school once school started.
Oh, so you did stay through the summer and then long enough to actually get into school over there?
For about a month, maybe a month and a half. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe just or 2 months. So yeah, and it was so strange. It was a little Episcopal school. Huh. So yeah, because there's not much else, in those little towns. They're all religious schools.
No, and I don't think they had yet started up Greenfields, which is the Scientology school there. I'm not sure, but I don't think it had started by that point.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Yeah. So I know this was close to the hotel.
Okay.
So we went, we could get there easily. I think even walking from what I remember.
Wow.
But I remember the teachers would give me a break on spelling tests because, the English spelling of words is different than the American spelling.
Yes.
So they were very sweet. They would say, well, we won't mark it wrong because
you Americans
we'll put an extra A in it and you don't.
That's right. Or they reverse their E's and R's at the end of a lot of words and stuff too, the way we spell things versus the way they do.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, but then life was about to throw another curve at you.
It was. So we were there till November. And November 1967, at the very end, November 28th, was the maiden voyage of the Royal Scotsman, which is now the Apollo, the Scientology ship.
A historic ship in Scientology history. A lot of things happened on that ship.
A lot of things happened on that ship, yeah. And, maybe we'll talk about this later. I had buried so much of this, Chris, buried, these are memories I'm talking about now, but it's taken me a long time to unearth those and to let those come to the surface because I really had buried so much of this. So, in the middle of the night, which seemed to me as a kid, the middle of the night. So I know it was dark outside, so I'm not sure what time we left, but came from school, got picked up, went back to the, hotel, told not to change out of our uniform clothes because we had to wear little, uniforms. It was a little religious school. And we got into a car with a driver. I'm assuming another Scientologist. I didn't know the person. And so my mom, my brother, and my mom had packed, and this is like the craziest thing to me. So and I don't know if it's because we were going on a ship, but it was one of those foot lockers, like an army person, somebody in the military would pack. And so she had gotten this locker and it was kind of this like military green. It was ugly. And she packed all our stuff in it. And so they put that, in the trunk of the car and we drove for a long time. And got to the docks. So the docks in Southampton. And we got out and they told us we had to be very quiet. We couldn't say anything. It was like a stealth mission, It's like, nobody could say anything, right? It had to be quiet. You were doing it in the darkness of the night and you're going to get on this ship. And I'd never been on a ship before, never seen a ship before. And I remember driving up and seeing the hull and seeing the smokestacks and like thinking, I don't know what I thought actually as a 9-year-old child, like it was exciting, I guess. But I remember thinking, what's going on now? Like, now what are we doing? Right. So we boarded the ship. I remember walking up, the stairs and getting on to the railings. And it was dark, so you couldn't really see, the ship and the shape of it. But then we went down. So we got onto the deck and then we went down. And the berthings were all below. Mm-hmm. And so we walked on these metal stairs, for a long time, it seemed like. And it's dark, so you couldn't really see. Followed this guy, so my mom and me and my brother were walking, and then finally got to, I want to say like a door, but it's just an opening because, it's a ship. And that's where the beds were. And there was this room full of bunk beds. And it was dark, so you couldn't see anybody, and you could only kind of make out the shape of the bunk beds. But everybody was asleep in there anyway, so nobody was awake. And my mom put me on the top bunk and my brother on the bottom bunk, covered us up with, the terribly itchy, scratchy blankets, that you might have in the military.
Like probably pure wool or something.
Right. Yeah. Covered us up with those. Didn't change my clothes, still in my school uniform, and said goodnight and left. And so that was that first night.
You have no idea where you are or what is going on. Kids, I tell you, they just drag them around like suitcases sometimes. It's really quite something, isn't it, in retrospect? You have no idea really what's going on. None. I mean, really is. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And especially because up until then, I'd had this very suburban life.
Yeah.
So my mother had really tried to create that.
Yeah.
And just to, to honor that. She really did try hard, but this Scientology pull and my dad's push, kept her involved in it. And I'm guessing, I have no idea, Chris, but I'm guessing that she had this allegiance to Hubbard because of her early relationship with him and working, at the founding church. And both my parents had that. And I have a feeling she got swept up in it. She got swept up in, okay, now we're doing this. Who wants to go? And she was a public Scientologist. She always was a public Scientologist. And so that was the time when public Scientologists were on the ship, that maiden voyage, with Scientologists who were the beginnings, of the Sea Org, the Sea Project.
That's right. Yeah, because something a lot of people don't realize is that those boats were not just Sea Org vessels where they were training and abusing and running the Sea Org, but those were also where the international management of Scientology happened from, because that's where Hubbard was. And there was training and auditing that were happening there to make money. And the public Scientologists would go there and do classwork and do auditing work that they could only do there. And Hubbard was around most of the time, and they were paying top dollar for that. And that's how they were still making money while this was all going on.
Right. So think about that money-wise. My parents have already paid, for her to go to St. Hill, lodging, all of that for all that period of time, which was a very long time that we were there. When you think about what a hotel might cost.
That's right. We're talking months now, right? Because you went there through the summer, and then, we're talking about November. So this is like, 5 months of being there, and then you're going to a boat. Your dad was paying out the nose for all this, I'm sure.
A lot of money. Yeah. A lot of money. Yeah. So she left the St. Hill briefing course because she didn't complete it. So she left it and then, went on board. So that was the night of the maiden voyage, which, has been chronicled very well by Hannah Eltringham, who sailed there and some of the other crew.
Yeah, you were on the boat with Hannah and a whole bunch of other people that of names we know. But you're just a little girl.
and just a child.
Yeah, you're just a child on this boat. I mean, you would have been like a little body in Hannah's field of vision. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have been. Anyway, it's just so interesting the way things.
Yeah. Sorry. And we were kept separate. So they did have a nanny that took care of us, a Scientologist who took care of us. She didn't have very good nannying skills. I'll just say that. What
please elaborate. You wake up the next morning and it's like, here's your nanny, or like, how does this go? What was it like there?
Right. So the next morning, after the maiden voyage, and it's my recollection, that it was that night. It may have been a couple of nights before that, but it was very close to, that maiden voyage. Yeah. So waking up after the maiden voyage, we were all told to go up to the top deck and we had to clean up. Like that was the mandate. Everybody up. So go up to the top deck. My mom came and got us. We'd eaten breakfast. We went up to, the mess hall. We went up and we're supposed to help clean up. So, I'm 9, my brother's 5 or 6, and there's my mom, and there's all these Scientologists mopping the deck because it's covered with water from the storm, and people are milling about, looking very, very busy, cleaning off the railings, and wiping things down. And that's when I noticed how rusty the ship was. Because the ship was not in good shape. All the paint was peeling off. And so, it was an older, it had been a cattle ship. So, it was an older ship. So we go up there with my mom and there's this bell. I always have this memory of how strange this was, Chris. There's this bell that had kind of an enclosure on it. And I don't know what it was for or what it was used for. But my mom, there were rags around. My mom took a rag and she told my brother to start polishing it, that we need to polish the bell because, he's going to be coming around and you need to show him that you're working. He, meaning Hubbard. Right. Hubbard. So my brother, is not wanting to do any of this and, he's balking at it and he's little and, and so my mom's saying, no, you've got to do it. You've got to do it. And then she gives me a rag. And so I take the rag and I walk over to the railing And I start like wiping down there. I'm watching what the adults are doing, so I start wiping down the railing, and there's Hubbard. Hubbard comes up. And he starts walking around, and everybody's furiously busy by this point, because, we want him to say, that you're doing a good job, and you want him to acknowledge you. Another Scientology word, right?
That's right.
To know that you're there and that, you're working for the Scientology and the planet. And so he walked very close to me on the railing there. And I'm trying to do my best there, looking down, and I'm very shy. So I'm, looking down and doing it. And he looked right past me, Chris. Right past me, never acknowledged my presence at all, and was looking out at the horizon, at the bow of the ship there. Yeah, so that's my one memory of ever running into L. Ron Hubbard.
That's your encounter. Okay, there it is.
That's my encounter. Yeah.
All right, and he looked right through you. He looked right past you.
And I was nothingness, to use another Scientology word, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you're just a little 9-year-old girl. He's got much bigger things on his mind, of course. What does they say? He has other fish to fry.
Right. Exactly. Right. And probably, thinking, thank God, we didn't all perish.
Basically.
It was a rough ride. Yeah.
So,
So,
let's see. Well, okay. So with this, then what happens? Okay, day one. Now, are you guys in, you said maiden voyage. Are you guys out at sea now?
So now we're at sea.
Wow. So you wake up and you're at sea.
Right. We're at sea. Exactly. Wow. So we're out there and there's the Mediterranean.
Wow.
Right. So you're at sea. Right. Right. So, and we.
Well, you still would have been. Well, you still would have been in the English Channel or around there, right? You hadn't yet gotten down to the.
Not gotten down yet, because when we passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, I remember everybody was so excited and everybody came up on deck. We all came up on deck. My mom must have come to get us. I just remember standing there and everybody pointing, like everybody was so amazed, when we went through that, because you could see land, on either side.
Right.
So that was pretty cool. So I remember that, and then there were the ports. There was Sardinia and there was Valencia and, eventually to Corfu. So we were on, for that period of time. So during that period of time, the Hubbard kids were also there. There were some other children, so public children, and possibly, and this is, I'm not 100% sure about this, but the Jessups, I believe their children were on board as well. And I believe they were working as crew, the adults.
Nate Jessup is a name I remember from early Sea Org years, if I remember right.
Right. So there were some little kids, and I believe that they were their kids, but I'm not 100% sure. But so we were there with a variety of kids, it was a handful. And so we had this nanny that took care of us. And I remember going to the bathroom there, and she took this hose, which to me seemed as a kid like a fire hose. Like it was this really huge hose, and she kind of sprayed us, to like wash us. And we had these duffel bags with our clothes, that we'd pull our stuff out, and she'd march us around. And we had this, I guess, I would say room, but this area, which was set up sort of like a nursery or like a play place. And there were some babies. There was a baby.
Wow.
There was really a baby there. Yeah.
Wow.
A baby that me and another little girl, we used to help kind of take care of and feed her and play with her. So I remember that.
Wow. And one person assigned as the nanny to watch you guys and teach you?
Well, she didn't teach us. We went to school with the Hubbard kids. So we were tutored with the Hubbard kids and there were a couple of other older kids there around my age, by a Scientologist named Sylvia Hare. And she was an educator and a Scientologist, older. So when I say older, I'm 9, my mom's 30 something. She seemed really old to me. So she might've been 40, or 50. I don't know how old she was really, but she seemed older, Okay. So she tutored us, and it was nice to go there though, because the Hubbard kids were there too. So it was a really nice part of the ship. So I remember the room was really nice. It had these red velvet curtains that kind of covered the windows there. And I liked school, so it was kind of fun, but we really didn't learn anything, Chris. There were the encyclopedias, the World Book encyclopedias. She had some of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like reading about the seven wonders of the world or something, like we just really didn't do much in there. Remember, Arthur would draw because he was an artist and he loved to draw. And Suzette would kind of sit around and she was kind of naughty sometimes. And so she'd not always do what she was supposed to do. And, Diana was older. She was like 16. So she was not with us. Okay. She was working, with her dad. And Quentin was there, not in the tutoring, but he was there sometimes in and out. I got to know him. And I really liked him. He was a really nice person.
That is consistent with every single report of him. Not one person I've ever known or report I've read about him said anything other than he loved airplanes. He loved life. He seemed to be a happy kid, but then not, because every desire he had was being actively suppressed all the time or something. There's kind of he's a very tragic figure.
Very tragic, very tragic. So, but he befriended me, which was kind of nice because, he was older by about 2-3 years. And, Arthur was my age, but Arthur he didn't pay any attention to me and I didn't pay any attention to him. He was busy. He was, he became an artist, or he is an artist, and so he was always drawing. And Quentin was, was sweet. And so he showed me, I remember he took me once to see we were walking on the ship and he showed me his lodgings. He showed me his cabin. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was so gorgeous, Really? It had like the wood trim and, because these were the nice rooms, where the Hubbard kids and the Hubbard family lived. And so it was very, very nice. And I remember he was in his white kind of, it wasn't Sea Org yet, but, the white pants and the white shirt and, looking like his dad, at that time, that's what they wore. So they kind of had a uniform, but not really.
Now, at this point within your knowledge then and now, if I remember right, we're talking late 1967. So this is getting to the time period where the Sea Org is actually kind of a thing now. It's gone from Sea Project, this sort of bunch of people out on a boat with Hubbard, to, no, we're going to do something formal with this. And there's uniforms and, ranks and stuff, I guess, start forming up. But this is literally the time period when all of that is happening, is forming. Right. Is that consistent with your knowledge and research?
Exactly. So it was very much that Sea Project era. Uniforms were not, there wasn't the official Sea Org uniform yet. Like I said, I remember him wearing these white, kind of clothing that looked more uniformy, and some other people, and Hubbard wearing that. And he had the hat. I think he had the, the captain's hat by that point. He was wearing that for sure. But it had not morphed into that. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that, happened in January. So, he showed me his room, he talked, and, don't you have a room like this? And no, I don't have a room like this, and just talking to him on the deck. And, he just was just a really nice person. But like you said, I think tortured, I think, looking back on it, he didn't want to be there doing this, but this was his life and his family, right. And he was loyal to his father. I don't know how much, I've read things that say he didn't really buy into all of it, so I don't really know, but at that time, he was just doing what, he had to do. And for all of them, honestly, and for Mary Sue, they had been abruptly transplanted from St. Hill, where they had, the run of this castle, and kids and all this land, to now they're on this ship.
Yep.
And that's their new life. So I can't even imagine, what that was like for them.
Probably not a whole lot different than it was for you. Disorienting, confusing, not understanding the context of what's going on, because of course Hubbard's doing all of this because he's on the run from the IRS and other governments and investigations. He was probably days away from the UK authorities knocking on his doors at St. Hill. He was under active investigation. And right. Scientologists were getting, were not even being allowed to enter into to England at this time period when you're going over there. So, your mom probably had to lie about why she was going over there when she went there in the first place. But this whole time period was a tumultuous time for Scientology, and L. Ron Hubbard was not in a good way during this time period. This was not a peak period for him. This was a struggle, and I'm running and I'm trying to make things work time period, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a good point. So perhaps the reason we got on the ship, Chris, is because of that also.
Yeah.
Because things were starting to go south at St. Hill.
Yeah. Yeah,
and that was a way to not get caught up, into that.
That's right. Plus, they were always trying to put this, Hubbard was one of Hubbard's superpowers. Sorry, is his ability to sell a future that just doesn't exist and is never going to. But he was just so good at it. That's how he kept it going through the 50s and 60s. Was he kept over-promising, and somehow when he under-delivered, he could sell it so people would, enough people would stick with it. Bunches of people left, but people would still stick with it. And I guess your mom and dad were one of those.
Yeah, definitely. So, she was in auditing and training during that time. I found in doing, my research also, some testaments that she made about ethics. Which are so interesting because, like you said, it was that very beginning time in the Sea Org. So it was before they were throwing people overboard.
Yep.
It was before, you were walking around with gray rags on your arms. That's because right. You did something naughty. Yep. So it was that period right before. So they were really starting to enforce what they called ethics, which was you had done something that was keeping you from taking in Scientology training and auditing, getting in the way of your case or whatever they said, Yeah. So my mom wrote about having ethics, kind of enforced on her, and how beautiful it was and how wonderful it was and how that's what was helping to get the tech in. Now she understood.
Right.
And that was, when I read that, Chris, I was like, oh my goodness, she really was hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a that would be a kind of a, what's the word? Conversion kind of thing, or recovery. As I recovered lots of people back into the fold in Scientology, and all you had to do was get them back into that euphoric, like, oh, this feels so good. Yes, come on back. We got plenty of this for you. And it's quite literally very analogous to waving drugs in front of an addict. It's like, come on. It's about like that, and they'll come chasing. And it's powerful stuff. I mean, when you're inducing trance and inducing, these awe experiences, it's powerful stuff. And people buy into it and interpret it as a spiritual experience, as this mind-blowing, revelatory thing. And it's really not hard to sell. And it was easier to sell back then than it is now. People are a lot more aware of this stuff now than they were back then. It was a whole new world, and science and potential and so many things were there for people back then and they thought Scientology was going to save the world. Right.
Yeah. And you're isolated. That's one of the tactics, right? You're isolated. So my mother's isolated in some little, room down on the ship, receiving auditing that's, activating whoever knows what, in her mind and bringing up whoever knows what, right? Mm-hmm. And you either go one way or the other.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and when you're out on the ocean on a boat, that ain't the time you feel, I'm going to go, bare my chest and tell everybody how full of shit they all are. That's not the time you're going to be doing that. So, yeah. Wow. I wanted to ask, was ethics applied to you guys when you were there?
To the kids?
Yeah.
It's a good question. Not that I remember.
Okay.
Because I remember being somewhat insulated in that we were with the Hubbard kids being tutored.
Okay.
So, and I remember other kids there. So not really so much. Mary Sue, I found also, Mary Sue had written a directive for the children on the ship. And it was for her own children, but also for the other children, which was basically, don't mess with it. This is what these kids need to be doing during these hours during the day. And anyone who gets in the way of that will have some ethics applied to them.
Okay. All right. So in a way, you had ethics protection.
We did.
From on high, right? Because the one thing you had going for you there in that situation, and it's unusual, not all cults are like this, but you actually had a plus with Mary Sue because she was almost obsessively
protective.
That's the word. There it is. Thank you. Of her children. And she had very good reason to be, given who she was living with, but, or married to. But no, really, she was very, very protective of those kids.
Yeah. And she had just, like I said, gotten onto the ship and they were just trying to establish, what was life going to be like there.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was interesting when I found that. I thought, oh, okay, so that's why, and I always wondered, like, how was it we ended up getting tutored, with the Hubbard kids? Like that just, to me at the time, it didn't seem unusual. I had no idea. I mean, it was all unusual. So nothing seemed more unusual than anything else.
Right. Well, yeah, the whole thing was, what is this? There's no other place in the world like this. So yeah, right. It must have been wild for you as kids in there. The heavy ethics stuff, just to sort of sort this for everybody who's listening, if you've heard of, some of the horror stories on the ship, it was bad at this time, but it became so much worse in the next year or two when Hubbard really started establishing some Captain Bligh style authoritarian, management of those boats. And I wanted to ask, though, I want to back up for a second, because you said something that nobody's ever really highlighted before to me. Ken, you saw it firsthand, the difference between the Hubbard quarters and the other quarters in the ship. All this time, I've been under sort of the impression, probably falsely, because nobody's ever really talked about it much, that Hubbard's quarters weren't really a whole lot better than anybody else's, and the whole boat was kind of in this sort of really not great shape most of the time. But I'm open to hearing a different version of that. That's just what I'm assuming, and apparently it was wood paneling and fixed up already. So it's because the boat wasn't in good shape. So they clearly did work on that in order to make that happen. And I have to wonder why it was only the Hubbard quarters and why the rest of the ship didn't get any good treatment. It wasn't like Hubbard didn't have the money.
Right. So it's my perspective. So as a child, so I'll just say that, that it was definitely nicer. So I know that, that's true. And to me, that's how it looked I remember the curtains, and I remember, there was some wood stuff, along in the room, like I said, in Quentin's room. It certainly wasn't the berth that I was living in the bunk beds, down below. Right. So my guess is, again, Mary Sue, maybe, this is their home. This is how it's going to be. I do remember definitely the study, where we were. That was definitely a nicer room where we were. And I remember when we went once to perform for Hubbard, this group of kids. And we sang a song, which I don't remember.
Wow.
But yeah, we had practiced it. And so it was dinner and we were singing for him. And I remember it was a different place than where we ate. It didn't look like, where we just went to eat. He was there and he had, I remember his plate was like filled with all this fresh fruit and things that, I don't remember eating at all, on the ship. I mean, in fact, I remember, and I found, the evidence to back it up. We had tongue served to us one night on plates. And and as kids, you can imagine.
Right. Tongue?
Right.
Yeah.
Tongue.
Ugh.
Yeah. And we didn't even go up to eat it. It was passed down to us to where we were. And I remember kids like, Boggy, I know I'm not eating tongue. I don't even know what it was, And I read that because they had not been able to get into ports, they were not allowed in all the ports.
Yep.
Not everybody was allowing the Scientology ship to go in.
Yep.
That they had not been able to restock provisions.
Right. Right.
And that food was really down to the minimum.
Yeah.
And so that made a lot of sense, when I read that, like, oh, okay, that's why.
Totally. Absolutely. That Hubbard struggled with that all the years of being over there in that area. Because they were onto him. I mean, he was on the run. He kept trying to spin this narrative to his people of this explorer, researcher, adventurer type guy. And he was never any of those things. He was a criminal on the run,
Right. Or a writer in seclusion.
Right. There you go.
That was that period of time, because that's when he first was, escaping the IRS, and he was this writer in seclusion.
That's right.
And he said, I'm not the head of the Church of Scientology. Yeah, a lot of falsehoods.
Oh, totally. Well, exactly, because he's saying that he's turned over the management. Officially, he's telling people and the world that he's turned over management of Scientology to a bunch of people at St. Hill. He never gave it up. I mean, I've read all the lectures. I've read all of them from the transcripts from that time period moving forward through the 70s. I know the track of Hubbard managing the church, and he never, ever let his fingers off the control.
No, never.
Never.
No.
No. It was all a lie.
I witnessed that firsthand.
And you saw it exactly firsthand. So please, tell me more. Tell me more about the boat while you were there. Was there any other stories or anecdotes to share the experience or the culture of it or what it was like there?
Yeah, as a kid and I've learned that, when you've experienced trauma, timelines are kind of weird.
Yeah.
That memories are kind of in and out.
Yep.
And so those are like my core memories of there. I remember we went off the ship once with my mom in Valencia, Spain. So I don't know if that was like the first time that you could dock after they'd run out of provisions. And we went to this restaurant and ate a really good meal. And I remember my mom, had to use her Spanish and to order butter and she was in a good mood there. And that was really one of the first times that we saw my mom on the ship, because we didn't see my mom much. We really, that's what I remember. Like, I really did not, she was absent, because she was sequestered, she was doing her auditing and her training, and ethics was being applied and all of that. So if she ever did see us, it was like a quick little visit that she probably was afraid she was getting in trouble for.
Right.
Because she was supposed to be, on the straight track of doing, the training and the auditing.
Right. Now, and again, to clarify or to be clear about this, your mother was not trying to be a Sea Org member there. Your mother was a public Scientologist doing services there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Big difference, because she's not going to be being thrown over the side, or at least not that came a year later. But as a public there, she's a customer. I mean, she's not there to be thrown into the engine room or something and in harsh discipline. She's there to be catered and serviced. But her kids are just kind of left to deal, except for the fact that you got tutoring with the Hubbard kids, which was quite the privilege, I'm sure.
Right. And again, I think it was just, it was being made up as it went along in some ways.
Yep.
In that it had just started, so I think Hubbard didn't really know what it was going to look like. He had this plan, to escape, but didn't really know what it was going to look like. So it kind of morphed, as it was being lived. And so ethics was being enforced to public, even, if my mother's writing about that.
Yep.
So it's starting to be enforced, but in that minimal stage, like you said.
Yeah, just the beginnings, In
the beginnings. Yeah. So finally, Christmas comes, my mother tries her best to get, us some little toys and stuff, which is so sad. I remember she loved Christmas. She was disappointed. She was, I think she was more disappointed than we were. She could find these little trinkets, and maybe that was part of going off the ship, in Spain. So she found these little, toys and stuff. And so she, gave those to my brother and I. But come January, the Sea Org is changing, right? The Sea Project is morphing into the Sea Org. Yep. So we're docked in Corfu, and all the public are being offboarded.
Ah, okay. So now we're going to change. We're going to shift gears here on this boat. Okay.
Starting to shift, right?
Yeah.
So I always had this memory, Chris, of sitting and eating It was white buttered bread with sugar poured on it. And my brother and I ate like pieces and pieces of that. So we were probably really hungry. But we were off the ship and we're sitting with my mom, and my mom, everybody smoked back then, and my mom smoked like a chimney. So she's, smoking her cool cigarettes, just like Hubbard. Right. And we're sitting there and we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and as a kid, waiting is so hard. And I just remember it being the longest time. And so when I went back, and was doing the research and learning about it, I realized that's what was going on. And so public was off, and it was going to only be the Sea Org. And I know part of this by connecting with Janice Gillum Grady, because that's when she boarded the ship.
Ah, she's coming on while you guys are leaving. She's
coming on while we're leaving. So our ships passed, literally, right, in the night. We never were on the ship at the same time. But she kind of helped me with figuring out what was going on during that period of time. So you had to sign a billion-year contract, to be in the Sea Org.
Yep.
So luckily for my mom, who knows what would have happened if we had not been with her. But luckily, we were with her, and no kids weren't wanted on the ship anymore. That was just, that was not working. What are we going to do with these kids, and that was just not going to be the plan moving forward. And so, they were off-boarded.
Right. Out you go.
Out you go.
Okay. So then where'd you go?
Where'd we go? We went home.
So you went back to the States.
We went back to Slidell, Louisiana. So
wow.
My dad is
what an adventure that must have felt like, that whole thing.
What an adventure, right?
Wow.
So, and then you're plopped back into southern suburbia I can't even imagine how much debt my parents had at that point.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So we get back and, and my dad is probably, he was angry he hadn't gone. Angry, probably about, I would say probably angrier that he wasn't part of the experience than the money,
right.
At that point. But I don't really know. All I know is my parents had this incredibly knockdown, drag out fight, with slapping and throwing coffee at each other and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And it was about what were they going to do next? So as a kid, we got out of bed because we heard it, and we're hiding and we're listening and thinking, okay, now what's going to happen, right? And basically, my mom said to us, so do you want to stay here and live with your dad, or do you want to go with me? And we're like, well, where are you going? And she's going to California. She's going to Los Angeles, to the Advanced Organization of Los Angeles.
Oh, the newly formed, by the way, Advanced Organization of Los Angeles. It was brand spanking new back then in 1968. And we're talking 67, 68 time period here now, right? We're over into 68
now.
Yeah. So this is brand spanking new. AOA has just opened. So she's going to go there again to do services?
Yes.
Okay, so she's not trying to go there to join the Sea Org or be part of that. She's just trying to get up this bridge and do the OT3 stuff.
So that's a good question. She's going definitely for services.
Okay. Oh, I only said the OT3 because that was the top of the bridge at that point. Hubbard had just released it, right?
Right. And I don't know where she was, in her journey.
Okay.
She didn't finish the Sand Hill briefing course,
right? Because
then she got on the ship. I don't know what she did on the ship, besides, I know, auditing. I know her auditor was a man named Scott Leland. He's since deceased. But I remember reading, an excerpt from him about how crazy it was while he was on the ship. So I think that her case was pretty messed up by then. In case in Scientology, we're talking about, all the stuff that's been brought up to the surface. It's like counseling that's never resolved, right? That brings up all these issues that never get resolved.
That's right.
And you have to keep doing it to get them resolved, right? So she's not in a good place. She's not in a good headspace. Maybe that's a good way to put it, And I think she didn't want to be back. I don't think she wanted to be in Slidell anymore. I think that my father may have, said, okay, so, you're going to fix yourself. You got to go fix yourself. You went there, you didn't fix yourself. Now you got to go here and you got to fix yourself. And again, he didn't go. My mother went. So we're left at home with my dad.
Okay. So you guys chose to stay with dad this time.
Well, now, Chris, we're like 10 and 7.
Well, no, only because we kind of left it there that your mom had asked you, do you want to go with me? Or, so
right. Yeah. So it's like, what do you say when you're a kid, and you're 10 and it's like, I think we just looked like I had no idea. I remember thinking like, where are you going? I don't know what to say. So I don't even remember saying anything. I just remember then the decision was made, and so that's what happened, and I think that was part of just part of my mom acting out during that fight, okay, pick your loyalty.
Okay, I see. Am I overstating or misunderstanding if I'm thinking to myself that your mom was contemplating leaving your dad at this point, or was this just over the fight was just over the Scientology progress?
Again, a great question. I don't think she had she didn't have the financial wherewithal to do that.
Of course.
She didn't have any of the wherewithal to do that. Right. So I think, I really don't know what she was thinking at that point, but I think it was a way to escape. Yep. She had a rationale that maybe she believed. Right. At that point. Right. She'd been on the ship, she'd been brainwashed some more. After all those years. And she had a lot of stuff that she was dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. Not to mention, she may have had her own personal encounters with Hubbard, as well as the auditing processes that were done on her and the ethics that was done on her. It's Scientologists meeting Hubbard it's a thing for them. There isn't any better experience to have in some ways. So who knows what interactions happen there. But if she was so convinced, according to her writings and stuff, of the ethics, then clearly she was exactly what you said, fully back in the headspace and the mix of that. I also want to throw out there that you don't necessarily know what it was she was receiving auditing on, but I can tell you that nobody was going to the ship to get lower level stuff. You went to the ship to get the special new stuff or the advanced stuff. You didn't go there for the regular stuff. You could just go to St. Hill or your local org for that. So she must have been pretty high up there. And given that the headspace, the shall we say, extreme commitment she was showing to this, where she's willing to drag her kids around, literally halfway around the world, and then ignore them most of the time for months on end. This is a typical cult headspace that parents can get into when they are in this very enamored place where the cult leader and the cult is all, and they literally kind of just forget their parental duties for swaths of time. It's a very, very disturbing thing that happens to parents with that.
Very much so. Yeah. And in the moment, I didn't realize it as a kid, because I had some freedom, it was kind of fun, as a kid. But in retrospect, as an adult and as a mother myself, I realized that was pretty crazy. It was really crazy. And you couldn't say no, though. You couldn't, once you were there, when you're in a cult, you don't go against it. That's just the norm. That's just what you do.
Oh, absolutely. Any social space, if you're in a social space and everybody's acting different, you're going to tend to go in that direction. It's just built in us to do that. And when it's a cult, the direction you go in is weird. People do weird stuff in these groups. So,
I do know she was clear by then, because when her ethics, it says she's clear number 700.
Great. Okay, good. Then that does help clarify that as well, or confirm that, because that's where people were going to see Hubbard and going to the boat for, was the upper level stuff. And at that point, just again to clarify, we're talking late 1960s, the grade chart, the bridge to total freedom that is such a central theme to Scientology, was a couple years old. It had just been formulated, this concept of levels that you climb as you go, to this infinite spiritual potential. And OT3, the Xenu thing, That's the top of the bridge at this point. It's fresh, it's new, and everybody wanted it. And they had no idea what was on it. It was this was all confidential stuff. So you didn't even know what you were getting into. You just knew you had to have it, and it was going to blow your mind and change your life. And I think, and that's where your mom was at.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I very much think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
and
that
she may
being
have felt pressure. Yeah. Like you said, she may have felt pressure too.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Well, okay. And your dad being such a believer, he was paying for it and pushing her and all that. So she goes out to California. What happens?
So she's living in an apartment in California, and she's at AOLA, Advanced Organization of LA, and she's training and auditing and doing whatever she's doing. And we're back in Slidell with Dad. So he put us back in school for a brief period of time. And then we leave. So we leave that summer, and our house is foreclosed on. Surprise, surprise.
Oh, wow. That kind of debt. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
The furniture is repossessed.
Whoa.
I remember the vans, coming to get it. And there's nothing in the house. Nothing in the house. We're allowed to take one toy each.
Whoa.
It was very sad. Yeah, it was very, very sad. And life with Dad was not good, Chris. Life with Dad was not a good place. The other part of my story is sexual abuse from my father, and that started in Denver and then continued in Slidell. It wasn't a good time.
Oh, so I'm so sorry. We haven't even hinted at that. What? That started in Denver?
Started in Denver. Those are my earliest memories. So, that's what I know. And those, like I said, it's taken a long time for all of these memories to come up. The Scientology ones that, I'm speaking of, those memories came later when I had a different trauma in my life happen later in life. And they were activated. They were activated by that. And and that was pretty hard to reckon with. And that's been a hard one.
I'm so sorry.
But giving me insights into, it's the premise of my story is, did my parents have these existing pathologies that were activated by Scientology, or did Scientology create these pathologies? It's the chicken or the egg dilemma. Which happened first?
It's right? A tough question.
It's a tough question. So, I can't answer that, honestly. I can't, I wish I could. But so it wasn't good times. But we get in the car, and my dad, the very obsessive compulsive personality. And so we drive in 3 days from, Louisiana to California.
Wow. That's a lot of driving. I've done that trip. That's a lot of driving.
Right. So it's a crazy road trip.
Yeah.
My mom's in LA, and, in the beginning of the orgs in LA, they were not housed in the pretty buildings that they are now.
Yeah, that's right. They were kind of scattered around Los Angeles, Hollywood area.
Right. Yeah. So, and it was in the downtown area of LA, which was, even back then, not a great area. And so she was living, actually at first in a motel. So a motel on, if you know LA, Alvarado Boulevard, which is, a big thoroughfare that goes all the way down to downtown LA. So that's where we met her, was at the Redwood Motel on Alvarado. And she had a handler with her there. There was somebody there. So when we came, there was another person there.
A Scientology handler.
Mm-hmm.
Why did she have a Scientology handler with her? She was just a regular public person. What was up with that?
I don't know. It's a good question. Yeah. More happened later, so I'm not sure, but I remember this other person, there with her. So we get there, and we have this reunion, which is not really, everything you want it to be as a kid. It's kind of weird. My mom and dad go into the hotel room and have sex, and, we're watching TV with the handler. It's just kind of a weird thing. And we're there at the hotel. And then the next memory I have is we're at an apartment building. So we moved into an apartment where other Scientologists live. one of the Scientologists was Doreen Smith, who went on to be one of the Commodore's messengers. She lived there with her mom in an upstairs apartment from us. So that was kind of weird, when I looked back at that and realized that's who that was. She married, I believe, Janice Gillam's brother, maybe.
Oh, okay. Connect those dots.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I believe that's the story. So anyway, so we move into this apartment. So other Scientologists are there. My mom and dad, are there now. We're all a family in this dumpy rented apartment, So we've gone from, a very middle class suburban lifestyle to now a somewhat impoverished lifestyle. Right. So that's what we're living now.
Wow. What was your dad's work situation at this point? I guess, was he still working when everything was foreclosed on out there?
I believe he was, but I'm not 100% sure.
So I think he was making money, but he just couldn't keep up with everything.
I don't think there's any way they could with the bills that they had. Yeah, it was what everything cost. Yeah.
Wow.
So then he got a job at Lockheed, which was way out in Palmdale at the time. So it was quite, it's like a 50-mile drive, from LA. So he's getting up and going there every day. And so he's early in the morning and late at night. And my mom is busy, doing her thing still with Scientology. So we had some freedom at the apartment building.
This I got to go back to this handler for a minute because it's the weirdest damn thing. The only time I've ever seen things like that is when somebody's on a suicide watch or something. Why did your mom have a handler, and was she around all the time, or what was that about?
So no, she was not around all the time. So I don't know what was going on with her during that period of time. She seemed okay when we first moved into the apartment building. So what quickly started to transpire is she started to have some psychotic episodes.
Oh, did she?
And she became agoraphobic and could not go out of the apartment.
Oh.
And I have one memory of a psychotic episode that my dad came home and had to get her out of the shower. She was being incoherent and singing and kind of speaking gibberish. And she was really in a bad place.
Got it.
Really in a bad place.
Got it.
So she was taken to a safe house, which was really another apartment building.
Right.
Right. So it was the Lanai apartments that she was taken to. And she had a handler there for sure. So we went and visited her there. I have a memory with my dad of going to visit her there.
What was she? How was she doing?
Well, she was speaking. She was okay. She was present. They were giving her, at that time in the 70s, they used to have this whole regime that they would give you, which was calcium, magnesium supplements and, getting you eating or not eating, depending on what they were trying to do with you, and isolating you, which was really their practice. We'll isolate you. We'll do this until we can get you what they called sessionable again. Right. Which means get you back paying for more auditing.
Well, exactly. And getting you, your body, sleep, and food, I guess. But this is after auditing and Scientology techniques. And I don't know what happened to your mom. But given the fact that your mom was getting what we already know were above clear, high level services, and she was having psychotic episodes, clearly this is a Lisa McPherson style. Like, she's not doing well with this Scientology, but when that's the only solution you have and you're adamant and extreme about your belief in it, you just keep going back to it. Is that what's going on here?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. So, as a kid, I can't tell you, what her levels were. I can't tell, I don't know that information.
Right.
I've tried looking up. As far as I know, she was clear which OT level she actually completed. I'm not sure. I know more about my dad's path, because that happened later after we got to California, than my mom's. But she did not do well. Right. I can say that, Yep. And so the aftermath of that was she was agoraphobic, and she would not leave the apartment. So she would not venture out. My brother and I remember going to the liquor store to get bread and milk and cigarettes, so we could eat and she could smoke. And it was crazy. Yeah. It was a very strange time, and we lived there until we moved so she gradually got better in that, she wasn't having any more psychotic episodes.
Okay.
So, she recovered from that. But we moved then. So we moved to a different apartment building, and that was in a different part of LA, which was now closer to the American St. Hill organization. So ASHO had been established.
Okay. And this was not in its current location. This was at the Temple Street location, the original location.
Yes. Yeah. Rampart and Temple.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we had an apartment on Lafayette Park Place, which was right near that.
Okay.
So the premise was my brother will go to a better school there. I didn't necessarily go to a better school because the junior high was not too great, but there was a better elementary school.
But you guys were going back to school at least.
We went to inner city schools, downtown LA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and talk about another culture shock. That was like its own culture shock and a whole nother, story there. So we did that. So then we moved, and my mother started going to ASHO. So my thoughts on it are that she became a liability at Aola, with all that had gone on. Yep. And it was like, okay, let's pass this problem over here, right? Let's see, you take care of it now.
Sure. That would be pretty typical for these orgs and how they operate. So, hot potato.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So you handle it.
Scientology, let me just say for anybody who maybe this is your first or second show you're listening to, or you don't know all the backstory on Scientology, because, I've talked about it so much, I sort of assume you all know. But Scientology creates psychosis. It creates insanity and unstable mental states through the application of its technology, its methods. This is not an uncommon result. It happens all the time in Scientology, and there have been famous cases documented of people dying as a result of Scientology's mishandling, not only of creating the psychosis, but then mishandling it once it happens. So this story with your mom is the same as what they continue doing all the way up to now. There's a suit in court right now for the wrongful death of a woman that had a psychotic episode because of Scientology. So this is an ongoing thing. Nothing new, nothing really, unfortunately, not unusual for Scientology then or now. And you're living through the whole experience of this as a kid. It's such a story. It's just horrifying. And then to have your father be physically abusive on top of that, Jesus, I really feel for this. This is not a lot of fun.
It's a long time to tell the story, Chris. Long time to finally let that story out. Yeah, you can see why. And thankfully, my mother recovered, because it could have been far more tragic than that. Wow. It could have really been far more tragic than that, and who knows what exacerbated it. I think Scientology for sure, like you said, the upper levels and what was going on there. I think she had so many things that had not been, as they say in Scientology, handled well, and she'd gone from, the ship, from St. Hill to the ship, and then now to Aola. And she was just getting a lot of different people messing with her.
Yep. Yep. I have not said this before, but since we're talking about this and it seems appropriate, I too had a similar kind of thing happen with my family, with my parents. Not the physical sexual abuse part, but the psychosis part. And that was not a fun time to live through either. I had a whole different context than what your mother, except for the fact that they were both doing Scientology intensively at higher levels. But yeah, it's not fun it's the opposite of fun. Let's put it that way, to have to live through and experience that.
And it's very frightening to witness.
Yes.
To witness.
Very.
Yeah, it's very frightening. And I remember feeling that, even though I was probably 12 by that time. So we're in California, so I was about 12. And I remember when we went to visit her, and I was afraid. I mean, the last time I'd seen her, my dad was getting her out of the shower, and she was talking, in a foreign language. I don't know what she was saying, and she was mumbling and singing, and she was not my mom, So then we go, and, my dad said, we go visit her. And I was afraid of what I would see. So the fact that she was sitting up in bed, and talking, I was at least thankful for that, but then she had a really hard time after, we'd gone up to St. Hill on the ship, being maternal. She tried her best. She tried her very best to be maternal, but I think things shifted for her, and because of the experiences and because of Scientology. And she was in such a bad place. She was not happy to see me. She was not happy to see my dad. It was not like, some heartfelt reunion, like, oh, thank goodness I'm okay now. It was nothing like that. Nothing at all like that. So, yeah. Oh. So that part's sad. Yeah. So we move. And so here we are, we're by Asho, and she's starting to venture a little bit outside slowly, to go to Asho. In the meantime, though, my dad is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So the symptoms had started on probably in Louisiana, but on our road trip, he was having trouble with his eyes. I remember he asked me to help read signs when we're driving. I remember sitting up, I'm 10, sitting up in the front seat with him, helping him read the signs along the way. And so by the time we moved to the apartment, within 6 months, he was in a wheelchair. He was diagnosed and he was in a wheelchair.
Wow. When it rains, it pours, huh? My goodness.
Yeah. So that was a rough time for our family financially. Financially, we were still recovering, finally, but I think that my dad was working at Lockheed, so they'd made some money and recovered some. We weren't living the lifestyle that we had before, the middle-class lifestyle. So, maybe the money went far enough. I don't know, how much debt they still had and what it was costing, for my mom to continue.
I don't know we don't know about the situation in terms of the foreclosure, bankruptcy, financial resource. We don't know any of that. We just know how your experience went, and it was not great.
Not great. No. So they'd started to reestablish themselves. So then this happened. So, we were on food stamps. We were getting Medi-Cal. My dad was getting Medi-Cal. Luckily, he was a veteran. And so he had veterans benefits, and he was able to get that. And that helped subsidize us. But, that was, again, in hindsight, as an adult thinking about that period, I knew it was not good, but I didn't really realize I didn't have, the adult perspective, as a kid. You only have that kid perspective. But I knew, it wasn't good. And watching your dad go from being viable, to being in a wheelchair, that was really hard. So by my 13th birthday, he was in the wheelchair and he was doing that. But prior to that, he had started his own path and started to do, his training and his auditing. And so he had gone through the OT levels. The ones so probably up to OT3, right? By that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He had a car that had Go OT license plates. I mean, my father was still a believer, a true believer, a true believer. Yeah. He had waited his turn, and it was his turn now.
Mm. And I'm sure the MS diagnosis sort of lit a fire under his butt too, as far as I got to get up these OT levels. I got to do it, because they believe, just so everybody's clear, it's not just about, feeling better or having an awe experience. On the OT levels, this is the gold. This is what you've been waiting for the entire time. And Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard insist that what you do on those levels when you're doing the practice of it is changing the entire future course of your existence, straight up and vertical. It's like you're going to be a supercharged God, is the promises that are made to Scientologists. If you're wondering why somebody would possibly do this to their family, their kids, their finances, their professional life, That's why, because the carrot is so star high and spectacular that people give up everything for it. And it's almost always a tragedy because Scientology cannot deliver that product.
They can't. And he'd been waiting. He'd been waiting. He believed it from the beginning. He'd become clear early on. And, he'd been waiting his turn to get all that done. Yeah.
And these were people who had rubbed shoulders with Hubbard. I mean, they were not just low-level public. They had been in the rarefied air of the guru. I mean, they were completely sold on this. It's an early days Scientology experience, a very different thing from what people experience now.
It was very different. Yeah, it was very different. With it morphing, like I said, as it was happening, it was morphing, it was changing. But I did find this one thing, Chris, that was so fascinating, that he wrote in Advanced Magazine. So Advanced Magazine is another Scientology magazine. So he wrote it as an OT, as his wins, which is, his success story. And he talks about watching a soccer game and moving the clouds around at the soccer game and moving the ball around at the soccer game and sending a theta flow out to the players in the soccer game. And I remember the first time I read it, I'm like, I don't ever remember my dad watching soccer. Like, he wasn't a big sports fan, number one. And then I remember thinking, okay, if he could do all that as an OT and he was sitting in a wheelchair, why couldn't he heal himself?
Bingo. There. I mean, right.
It's the sad part.
It's almost impossible to understand. It goes so far beyond sad, words like pathetic come to mind, and not pathetic like, you're in the gutter pathetic, more like, why? It's so frustrating. Believe me, I understand. I totally understand. I have to ask you though, just since we're at this particular point or juncture here where, okay, you've said your father abused you. You said your father sexually abused you. I want to know a little bit more about that, just so I can have a little clarity on the relationship, because I'm wondering what your viewpoint was of him at this point now with this history, this rocky history. I mean, what was your perspective of him at that point?
Right. So, as a sexual abuse survivor, I've learned that memories get repressed. And, that's for your survival. It's the way the mind deals with them. So I always had a very early memory as a little girl of my dad telling me that we had to keep this secret. And there was this secret that we had to keep. So I always had that. When another traumatic event, so during that whole time growing up, I was definitely living it, but as an adult, I didn't remember. So when I started to write, which was after another traumatic event that triggered those sexual abuse memories, I always had the Scientology memories there. They were like always, it was like they were right underwater. And I always squashed them down because, I didn't want to think about them. That was another time. That was not my life. It was not the life I'd created. I was not a Scientologist anymore. I didn't want anything, to do with that. So I'd always, I moved on and I kept that down. So right under the surface of those Scientology memories were the sexual abuse memories. It's kind of like layers. It's how I kind of see it. And so once that traumatic event happened, I had this triggering memory. And I started, thinking about it. I started writing about it. And then it's like it's like a mirror that shatters. There's all these little slivers and they start to fall out. And so you start to see that. So prior to that, during that period of time, my mom was the enemy and my dad was who I had loyalties to. As crazy as that is, because my mom was the crazy one. She was the one who was leaving us. She was the one who was taking us all over the place, right? She was not the stable one.
Right.
Where my dad was the one, we lived with him, we stayed with him. he was the one that they had loyalty to. Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of crazy as well. And so, when he got sick, it was really hard for me as a teenager. I was puberty and that period of time. And it was very upsetting to me. And my mom, was kind of not really a parent because she was having this agoraphobia and she really wasn't able to do anything with us. My dad was the one who, took us to Disneyland in California and, did things with us, where my mom really didn't have the capability during that time to do it. Okay. So that shifted though when he got sick, because my mom had to make a decision. She had to rally. She had to figure out what she was going to do. I mean, we were already living, on food stamps and money was, there wasn't any money. It was the benefits that we were receiving. And so she slowly on her own distanced herself from Scientology. She'd started already, and she got a job. She found a job. She had been doing some, and this is crazy, but she'd been doing some transcription for ASHO where she could listen to tapes at home and type up the notes.
Yep.
Yeah. So that happened. Yeah. During that period of time, which I didn't even know.
What time period are we down? Where are we now in the chronology? What years are we talking about now?
1970, getting into 71 during that period. Yep. Yeah. So she was doing that for them. So she kind of had this connection still. She hadn't severed the ties, but she miraculously got a job. How she got a job, I don't know. I don't know if she used her Scientology experience on the resume. It was a different time. There was no computers. There was there was none of that. You typed up the application, you mailed it in, or you walked it in, and That's you did your interview. So she got a job as a legal secretary. She had always been those were always her skills, typing and note taking and things like that. So she got a job and she started working. And my dad was in a convalescent center, and then he was moved to the Veterans Hospital in Long Beach. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long? So the MS came on pretty quickly, or how long until? What was
within 6 months of the diagnosis, he was wheelchair bound, and then within another maybe 3-4 months, he was in a convalescent home. With MS, he probably had it for years and had symptoms, and that's another thing about Scientology is Scientologists are not good about seeking medical advice.
They suck at it. They really mostly don't like doctors, and they think it's all a con.
Exactly. Exactly. The fact that my mother even got my dad to go and get a spinal tap and to get the diagnosis speaks to how afraid he was.
Wow. Well, the precursors to it are gruesome. I mean, because you have the shaking and the muscle. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, and he must have been fighting that for quite some time because when it came on, it just came on so quickly. It's just,
for years.
Yeah. Just, wow.
Yeah. He was just 40 because he died when he was 49. Yeah, so he was just 40. Yeah.
Wow. So he endured that for 9 years through the 70s. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And your mom had to basically then turn around and support him that whole time. And you guys.
My mom.
Your mom did, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the benefits covered his, Medi-Cal, and the benefits covered his convalescent care, and he had a veterans benefit, so that covered him.
Okay. So she was just having to take care of you. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But you were obviously. But I have it right that you're under the roof with her. She's working. You guys are doing your growing up, going to school thing, and that's kind of how life went through the 70s for you.
Pretty much. So then my path started in Scientology. So my dad was still living with us when I started going to AOLA, so Advanced Organization LA, and Celebrity Center. So Celebrity Center had just been established. Mm-hmm. Yvonne Jens, was chosen for that. And she had just started that up. And I don't know my parents' connection with Yvonne, but I think there was a connection in that I was volunteered by my parents, to go and to help out there. And I had never done anything with Scientology aside from like a little communications course for kids at St. Hill. That's all I had ever really done with Scientology, besides, being carried around by my parents, besides following them. So I started in the summer. I'd started junior high. So I started in the summer and I walked because my mom she didn't even have a car by then. And she was not driving then because she was still battling that agoraphobia at the very beginning before she got the job. And so I walked. And if you know LA, it was a lot of blocks. It was a lot of blocks from where we lived. Asha was really close, but the others were really far away. So I would walk, and I actually really have good memories of that, in that I was free. I was out of the house. It was not a pleasant situation at home. And so I was out of the house. Yvonne Gents was delightful. I mean, just her accent, her positive attitude. She was like a ray of sunshine when she would walk into the room, no matter what you were doing. And the job that I and this other kid were doing was meshing the files from the Advanced Organization of LA, and these are Rolodex files because there's no computer files, with celebrity centers. So you're trying to mesh these two contact lists, basically. And so you're picking up, a Rolodex, and you're looking for it in the other one, so it's like painstaking work.
Yep.
Terrible work, right?
Yep. Typical Scientology paperwork. It's the hardest possible way to do anything that'll take the longest amount of time and be the most annoying. That is how they do all their paperwork.
Right.
Yeah.
But she would walk into the room, Chris, and I would be so happy to see her. And she would tell us what a great job we were doing and how we were being so helpful, and you just felt like you were the best thing there.
Yeah. Yvonne was the anti-Hubbard. She was amazing. Yeah. Not one person I've ever met in all the years that I was in and out of Scientology, not one person has ever had anything bad to say about Yvonne Gensch, except for the fact that she abandoned her kids.
Right.
But in terms of her personality and her attitude and the way she approached things and the way she dealt with people, it was above the boards. And in many ways, people just described her as this angelic figure. I mean, she was so different from regular Scientology. It's almost like, what was she doing there?
Right.
Yeah.
But she was a true believer in that. She believed in the outcome. She believed that it was altruistic work.
Yep.
She believed that you were doing this work for a purpose which was going to make everything better.
Exactly.
Right?
It's what kept me going for decades. Same thing.
Exactly. And she really, anytime she opened her mouth, that was the message, and with Celebrity Center, it was, now here's a place where artists, can help the world. Right. Now here's a place, where we can honor them and the work that they do, That's right. and so it was a good vibe that way. But as I got more involved in it, should I talk about that?
Yes, please. Please
okay.
Carry on.
So
yes.
So I got more involved in it. So it started with the volunteering, and I'm pretty sure, like I've written in my book, I think I was volunteered in that my parents were no longer paying members. My mom was distancing herself from ASHO, and her Scientology work. My dad could no longer do it. And so I was kind of the scapegoat. I was the one they could offer up. And so I did do some training, which I'm sure, my parents had to pay for. So they were still paying. So I did some training at AOLA. And then once I was doing that work at Celebrity Center, I started to do some training there. So I remember like the student hat course, which is, the very basic course where you learn how to be a good student and how to, look up misunderstood words and how to make little, I used to call it playing with Play-Doh, little clay models of everything, to say that you know what you're doing. So did all of that and was really accepted into the culture of Celebrity Center as a kid, because Yvonne honored everyone. And so it was a really inclusive environment. I never felt, and even at Aola, I never felt like I was, just a kid, because Scientology's whole mantra is, you're a Thetan. So
That's
a
right.
thetan is like a soul, you've been here forever, you've had millions of lives, and this is just one of them, and here you are, and so your age doesn't matter, none of that matters. You're just one of us.
It's interesting that you bring this point up, because it's sort of the other side of the mirror of, or the subject matter of how Scientology thinks about kids. We've talked about this so many times on the show, about how abusive it can be, or opens the door to abuse, when children are thought of as adults in little bodies, that they're just these adult, ancient spirits that are just growing a body right now, and they're perfectly responsible and perfectly able and perfectly capable, just like adults are. And this has led to all kinds of problems and abuses. But I see the other side of this one, what you just said, just kind of how empowering it felt and how independent it felt, and why kids would go along with that or feel that's a great thing to start with, is because it feels empowering,
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I've forgotten about that part.
And especially as a teenager.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And as a teenager, you're like, yeah, I want to be an adult. I want you to see me as an adult.
That's right.
So, the downside of that is that you're not, and you're with all these adults.
Exactly.
But you don't have the mental capability. You don't, you're lacking still.
That's right.
But have these expectations to do all these things alongside adults.
That's right.
Right. So, right. I did the training courses, and then over time, became an auditor myself.
So you did enough training. Did you learn how to use the e-meter?
Yes, I did.
Wow. So you got like full on pro auditor kind of training.
Yep.
Wow. One
of my trainers and auditors was Ray Midoff. So Ray Midoff is a top echelon Scientologist in the Sea Org. At the time, he had just arrived. And I was blown away, actually, when I started doing my research, because like I said, I had really not gone back into Scientology at all. Like once I left, it was like, okay, that's down there. And, the internet didn't exist, so there weren't ways to go, check it out, until much later. Right. And so when I started doing my research, I was shocked. I had no idea, that he was so important.
Oh, wow. You found out after the fact of what his rise. Yeah. He got all the way to the top. He was senior technical person for Scientology planet wide. He held a job that was very, very important for a number of years, but this was his early days working with you. Yeah.
He just arrived from Texas. And looked like a cowboy. He had the Texas air. Yeah. Texas air about
really
him. Yeah.
Tall. He's unusually tall, Ray.
Unusually tall, boots, the hat, everything. He was, So, and his wife, Gelda, she was not quite his wife then, was there too at Celebrity Center. Yeah. So I remember I had a crush on Ray, because I was 13, 14. And so I was thrilled anytime, I could do training with him or auditing with him, so, I had that perspective, as a young teenager. And he was smooth. He was very empathetic. And he was very, he had a great poker face. He had a great poker face, when he was doing the training. And he was unflappable, is kind of what I remember. Nothing could really set him off at all. He didn't react,
right.
Which is a really good trait if you're a Scientology auditor, right? Because you're going to hear a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah, they kind of train you into it. And I wish the training wasn't so, what it is, but I definitely get what you mean. Ray could be what they would call a stable terminal, right? It could be a stable guy. He could be the port in the storm sort of guy.
Yeah. So during that period of time too, with auditing, like when you talk about how Scientology is so different, you didn't have to just do your auditing at the orgs. People were doing it in their apartments. Like I had some auditors where, and I didn't drive because I was a teenager. They would pick me up and we'd drive to their apartment, and we'd sit at their kitchen table. And so I remember thinking about that, as I was doing my writing, I'm like, that was kind of weird, like, and that I was allowed, like that my mom never thought twice about that, to let me go do that.
No, it's another Scientologist. You trust them implicitly, right? Without even knowing them.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So I did a lot of that. And then I became an auditor, and I have pockets of memories of that. of the training and all of that. But I do remember feeling really excited about being an auditor. And really, like, now I had arrived, like now I was doing what all these adults I had seen doing. And, I went to school still, so I could only do it, on the weekends or, during the summer. So I remember a couple of sessions of auditing. One is like, I don't know, imprinted in my brain. This woman that I was auditing, and I'm a kid, so I had the capability because I could understand the training, but I'm not an adult. So I don't have the same adult, I guess, I don't know, experiences, and I don't have the same adult ability to interact the way that you would with an adult. I'm a kid. So this woman, I'm, watching the e-meter, and the needle's kind of going wacky, because the e-meter, everybody knows, is this box that you use, and you hold these tin cans, and it's supposed to record, your what's going on with you, your overts, your omissions, right? All those things. And you're telling, the auditor your deep, dark secrets. And so the needle's going kind of wacky. And I must have reacted. And so the woman said, is everything okay? And I said, oh, yeah, it's fine. I'm just watching your needle or something like that. And she said, oh, is there a problem? And I said, well, I don't even remember what I said. I don't know, maybe if I said yes or if I said I'm not sure. And she said, oh, I'm probably just really hot. I'm going to take off my sweater. So she disrobes, and she has no underwear on underneath it.
Wow.
So she's flashing me, right? It's there. So now we're in a topless auditing session. And I'm 14 years old, and I think my eyes must have popped out of my head, Chris. Yeah.
Wow.
And I put my head down, and you had to take copious notes when you're an auditor. So you had to write everything that was being said and, what you did, what they said. And so, and I'm sure I didn't put any of that in the auditing notes. I am almost positive, that I omitted all of that. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was kind of wild. Yeah. And then sadly, another time, so there were some other times, but there was one time where someone divulged to me something that was happening in the dorms, and it was a sexual abuse situation. And I did write down what they told me. I was too naive to really understand exactly what they were saying and the implications of that. But then I was grilled by the case supervisor. I was grilled to find out what had been said, how was it said? Is this actually what was said? These are your notes. And I really didn't understand why they were doing that, and being so hard with me on it. But then the case was taken away from me.
Yeah,
and really no
sense.
Explanation. Yeah, well, no explanation.
Of course. I mean, and you're already aware of the fact that, some of this is going over your head. They were probably like, whoa, get that thing away from her, quick.
Right. And squash it, because if sexual abuse is happening in the dorms, we don't want that written anywhere.
Now, you mean in the Sea Org dorms? Mm-hmm. Right. So you're auditing somebody who's in the Sea Org who's telling you there's some criminal stuff going on where I live.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And they're like, get that away from her. Yeah.
Right. And the Sea Org dorms were sketchy at that point, because they weren't all, from my understanding, they weren't all Sea Org members. And so there could be some Scientologists that were living there alongside Sea Org members at that time in those dorms and those old craftsman homes, in downtown LA. Yeah. And so I think it was more of a situation of that.
Yep. Because
there were some, that were and some that weren't. And uniforms were not worn by everyone. There was still, you could wear, street clothing and all of that. The uniforms had not come yet. That was happening on the ship after we left.
Right.
On the Apollo once the name changed, but it wasn't happening really at the craftsman homes and where all that was happening in the 70s.
Well, also on top of that, the Sea Org was very different in the 70s when it was first forming up and establishing and figuring itself out. And up until 78 or 79 or something, having sex out of wedlock was not a rule. They didn't care. They cared to the degree that it created trouble and issues when you're, sleeping around, people get very dramatic and there's a lot of emotions, and it would destabilize, the work that they wanted getting done. And that's eventually why Hubbard, I think, came down on it. But it was very loosey-goosey and people were sleeping around, and it was the 70s, and it was, it was like the 70s. So it was a different time for sure. But if sexual abuse was still sexual abuse, and it was still illegal. So, even if they were sleeping around, they didn't have a license to do anything. Right.
And there was a lot of sleeping around happening. Let's just put it that way. There was a lot of that. And a lot of changing of partners. There was a whole lot of that. Yeah, it was a very free love situation in the 70s.
Yes, very different time period.
Very, very different.
And within the Sea Org, very different, right? Like, and when I said, when they clamp down like a cult would. They go all the way, right? Oh, people are having too much sex. No sex. None ever, right? You have to get married, put a ring on it, or it ain't happening. And that changed everything, right?
Right.
Okay, so you became a trained auditor. That's not nothing in Scientology. That's a lot. And you're a teenager. I mean, this is so parallel to what I was experiencing. And believe me, I can understand when you say as a teenager in an environment with adults where you're getting this training, it is putting I had myself on such a little pedestal because I was in there with the adults doing the adult stuff, and look at how mature I am, and look at I can save the world too. Look at me, right? And I can be part of this. It was incredibly empowering to me. And one of the big reasons why it was easier to get me on staff is because I wanted, I kind of wanted more of that, because these were people who were making me feel important, and the rest of society and the rest of the world didn't seem to have that view of me as a kid, right? That was my, but was that how you were feeling too?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I had to keep it. I don't know how you felt at school, but I didn't tell anybody.
Nope.
Tell anybody that I was doing any of that.
Nope.
That was not something I was talking to my friends. No, nobody knew.
I had a couple of my friends knew, but they made fun of me quick enough that I shut it all down. So I was like,
Yeah. I think the same thing. I might have sent it once and it was like, what? And I was like, oh yeah, we're not talking about that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you try to explain it to them and they just don't get it. And you're a teenager and they're a teenager. So they want to jump to, making fun of it right away. And it was just, it just didn't.
It didn't. No, it didn't mesh. So it's the whole thing about secrets too. So, Scientology is this cult, and there's this technology that's very secretive, that you can only learn if you're a Scientologist, and you only can do it at these different levels, and you have to go through all these levels, and then you can learn the next thing. So like you said, it's the carrot, you keep doing it, but then that you can't tell anybody these secrets because they're only Scientology secrets. So even if you're going to talk to somebody about it, what are you going to say to them? How are you going to explain it? So you learned, I learned, you just keep that secret. That's just a secret life. Nobody needs to know
every
about
time I tried to breach it, I blew it. Every single time, I ended up talking about spaceships, or I'd end up talking about some spiritual stuff that was just, flying over everybody's head, and nobody really wanted to hear it.
Yeah. So no. So I never, I didn't mesh those two. So I had these very, two different identities for sure.
Right. So what happened to break away from this whole thing?
So, thankfully in 1975, so I'd been an auditor. So I was 14. So I turned 15. I'm still doing some of it, so I'm kind of this hybrid Scientologist. I'm going to school and I'm doing some training and I'm an auditor, but I can only do it, weekends and summer. And, I did some in the evening. I remember that, I would go and there was a nice Scientologist who would pick me up. And that was actually when they moved Celebrity Center up to an area in LA that's near Griffith Park, not Griffith Park, well, kind of near Griffith Park, the Greek Theater, up in that area before it moved to where it is now. And so there was that transitional period. And so he was the nicest man, Bob Omblad, and he would pick me up on his motorcycle at my apartment, and he would take me up there, So it's like I didn't have a way. They always found a way, to get you there. And so I was still doing that a little bit at night. So then I started, to get into high school life. And I met friends that were in this youth organization that wasn't religious, wasn't really affiliated with anything, just was fun. And so, started doing some dating of boys and, kind of became a real teenager and stopped going as I had been going.
Perfect. You were saved by real life.
Started to living real life and coming up with excuses and all of that. And so my boyfriend is at my apartment, and my mom was not there, and my dad, is sick and he's in the hospital. And so these two guys come to the door, and I open the door, and there they are. And I'm like, oh man, these are Scientologists. And I hadn't seen them, I'd say probably like maybe 5-6 months. Prior to that, they'd really given me the hard sell on joining the Sea Org, because that started, like you said, your prime candidate for that. So they had started to put the push on, the Sea Org, and it was really starting to grow. And that was really the movement, to join the Sea Org at that time. Yeah. And it had been on the ship, but now, on land for sure. Everything was changing.
Right.
And it was becoming that.
Such a shift period. In fact, 1975 is around the time period when Hubbard comes back to land out in Clearwater in Florida. And they're setting up, Project Normandy, and the raid hasn't happened yet. Nobody knows about any of this stuff. The FBI hasn't raided Scientology yet. The GO is operating with full impunity. Operation Snow White is going full tilt boogie during this time. They're infiltrating governments. All of that is happening, and Scientology is feeling really super powerful and trying to grow the Sea Org. And so they come down on you for a recruitment. How'd that go?
How'd that go? Well, they saw that, I was alone. Where you been? How's it been going? And it's like, well, obviously this is what's been going. My boyfriend's standing behind me. And they didn't pressure me, Chris. They didn't say more. I had almost joined prior to that. When I had come home for the hard sell, I was ready to go. It was probably about 6 months before that, and I was ready to go. I was starting to pack my bag, and my mom was hysterical. She was hysterical that I was going to join the Sea Org, because by that point she was, had moved past it. Although she still, I would say to her dying day, believed in Scientology. She never stopped believing, but she had seen what had happened to herself, probably. And, from her experience on the ship, and knew enough to know, with her experiences at ASHA, what the Sea Org was going to be, and did not want that for her daughter. Right. And so she said, there's no way you're going to do this. I mean, we had this huge fight. And finally she said, I'm going to call the police. And I was like, oh man, I thought, will she really call the police? Like, I was scared. I was too afraid, to balk and to say, okay, I'm going anyway. And I didn't. I didn't that day. I had second thoughts. Good. Thankfully I did. So, they didn't really pressure me too much. They just said, want to see you back at the org, this and that. And then, they never came into the apartment. It was just kind of in the, I had the door open and we were just talking. They were in the hallway. And I really think because they were out of their element, there were just two of them. There were just two of us. And they didn't have the whole backing. It wasn't happening in the organization, at one of the buildings, with all the other Scientologists there. I think that they really couldn't do more. And they didn't do more. Not with your boyfriend standing there. He's an unknown quantity to them. They can't start launching into Scientologies and getting into all the weird stuff when, some guy is just standing there. Because they couldn't isolate you, in other words. Yeah. So, in Scientology, that's a WOG, and you don't want to, interact with a WOG. That's right. Very, very defamatory term, by the way. That's how Scientologists call everybody who isn't a Scientologist. Yeah. That's the word I didn't even know when I was a Scientologist how bad that word actually is. It's like, wow. Go Hubbard. Right, exactly. It's such a derogatory term. So I dodged a bullet. Thankfully, I dodged a bullet.
Your mom actually did you a real solid at the end of all of that.
She really did. You know, there were other things that happened, but she really did. And I think, you know, I'm so thankful for that. I am really thankful for that. I think that was very hard for her. I think she was very torn. Yep. You know, it was really always very hard for her. And even to the end of her life, like I said, she believed.
Right.
Even though when she wasn't involved, there were pieces of it that still resonated with her. You know, things that she still believed that she would talk about. Yeah. So that was my short Scientology path of the 70s.
Well, you know, it's quite, I mean, the whole thing is quite a story. And it's a story that has been most interesting to me because it's, in a way, it's the Scientology experience is told through the eyes of a child, right? Of a minor, of somebody who grew up in it, but then, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm out of here, right? This isn't working for me once you actually start integrating into the real world. But the whole time that your parents were able to sort of keep you in this really kind of weird gray zone where you're half in, half out of Scientology. You're doing it, you're not, you're going to England, you're back in the States. You know, it's a wild, trippy ride that you were on that whole time, you know? So it was a pretty unusual experience in that sense.
It is, and it's told from the child's perspective and the public perspective.
That's right.
So different from, you know, that Sea Org perspective. And I think because it is that very distinct snapshot of time in Scientology, you know, from the 1950s to, you know, the 70s.
That's right.
And that was a very, it was a changing time, you know, things were they were happening. They were being built. It's like building the airplane as you're flying it, right? they were happening quickly, very quickly, and changing, you know, you'd do one thing one day and then, you know, the next year you'd be doing something else. It was just changing as it was happening. And so I escaped what would have been, you know, the life that you lived.
You did. You did.
I escaped it.
Yeah, you really did. And the 70s were an even worse time. Anyway, it was just because, like I said, I mean, you were a year or two away from the raid and the breakdown of the Guardian's office and the takeover and the Mission Network fiasco that happened in the early 80s. I mean, the next 10 years were the most insane time in Scientology. You got out just before all things went really nuts, right. like gangbang sect checking nuts. Like they were doing psychotically crazy things from the management level down to the public from that point forward. Once and it's in that chaos that Miscavige takes over and Hubbard dies. You know, and out of that comes everything we've seen of Scientology since under Miscavige's reign, which has just basically been him taking it down and down and down in membership and in influence. And this is a good thing. We're happy about that.
Right. You know? No, definitely. Yeah. But my life would have been very different. So I think that's, you know, I'm, you know, in my 6th decade of life. So, you know, I've lived my life from that point forward, from that 70s forward. But I think the thing that I want to say, you know, to your listeners is that it doesn't leave you. So once you're in a cult like that, once that kind of thinking, you know, is imprinted on your brain, it's really hard to leave it. Really, really hard to leave it. So even, you know, through all those years that I wasn't involved in Scientology, I still had that thinking like a Scientologist, if that makes any sense.
It makes complete sense, certainly to me, and I'm sure it will to my audience. Since you brought that up, and since it's actually a really good point about this whole thing, you know, you're 2nd generation Scientologist growing up. That's what you were. And you managed, you know, through in your later teen life and adult life to walk away from that. And yet you make the excellent point that just because you physically walk away from it doesn't mean you mentally drop everything. When did it start occurring to you, or what happened in your adult life with those? Like, what kind of challenges did that present for you? having these, the ARC triangle and being a trained auditor and thinking the E-meter is something and that there's a reactive mind and all this stuff, even though you're not a practicing Scientologist, what effect does that have in your life?
For me, I think it's that dichotomy. You have these two identities still. So I think that's the hardest part, is that you still think like a Scientologist, even though you're out in the world, living your life, creating a family, working, doing normal things, getting involved in, maybe, school functions with your kids and, your work life and making friends and all of that. There's still this part of you. And for me, this was true, that I had to keep hidden, because if anybody knew that I thought like that, I knew nobody else thought like that I was meeting. There weren't any other Scientologists I was meeting. These were what I called normal people, in my mind. They weren't like my family. They were normal people. Thank God I found them. And, thank God I'm here. But I still know that I can never tell them. I can never tell them, that these are thoughts that I have and these are things that I experienced, and that there's a part of me, that still believes some of that. It took me a very long time. And I would say finally, in the writing and the uncovering and everything, that I've been able to say, no, that's not true. No, that's not true. Not that I know what is true all the time, but I know that's not true.
Got it. Totally got it on that. What prompted, writing a book, doing research, doing all this work, and then, of course, after that, then coming on podcasts and stuff. What prompted all of this? I mean, you didn't have to do any of this. What started your, hey, I think I should go back and look at this and write about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So after, being on the ship, that was a hard experience. I realized later in life. So, have a family, and we were on a cruise, and we had rooms that were on the lower, levels. And so you could hear the engine room, and I started to freak out. I started to have this panic attack, and I had no idea what was going on. I just knew I could not be in that room. I was crying. I was hysterical. I mean, I could not be there, so we went up to the deck, and kind of regrouped. And so we got through, but I came home and I remembered the ship. I remembered the Royal Scotsman. And I started to write about it, and it just poured out, Chris, like this whole description of it and boarding the ship and all of that. And so I was able to kind of go, oh, okay, that's what that was about. Okay, yeah, now I get it, but I don't really want to think about that. So I put that away. And that was probably 20 to 30 years ago. It was a long time ago. So then, like I said, I had a traumatic experience happen about maybe 15 years ago. Okay. And that started to trigger the memories. And so it triggered the sexual abuse memories. And then all the other was right there underneath. And I started to write. And it just started to come out. So it came out like in these little vignettes, like little memories. It was, like I said, somebody just was like a little sliver of something, like a mirror had broken. There was this little sliver and that little sliver, and they didn't make any sense to me. I just thought, why am I thinking of all these things? And so I just let it happen. I let it happen. I mean, and that sounds kind of crazy. Like it just felt organic, like it just had to start coming out. And I was at a place in my life where I could let that happen, and felt like I was safe enough, and where I was to let that happen. And it came out. And the more I wrote, the more that came out. And then I tried to put it together to make sense of it. I'm like, this is kind of a story. Like, is this a story? Like, it seems like there's a chronology here. And then I tried to put time frames to it and try to figure out where all these things had happened. But there were so many holes. There were so many holes because my parents, had passed. My mom had passed years earlier. And so I didn't have them to talk to. I didn't have anybody to talk to about it, just my brother. And I realized he had a lot of the same memories. He had a lot of the same memories when we would talk about things that had happened as kids. So then I was like, okay, I'm not crazy. These things did happen. His perspective was, a younger perspective. So he didn't have exactly the same memories, but, we did share them, that we had been in the same places at the same time and seen the same things and done the same things. And it just kept going, and My daughter works in the art world, and she said to me, artists say this all the time, but the art takes you there. You start and you think it's going to go one way, and then the art takes you, So it's like, I can't even tell you I had control over where it finally ended up, because the story just had to be told. I just felt like it had to be told. And it's taken me, 10 years, a little over 10 years to allow that to happen and to be okay with it. And to be okay with where I am in my life, to say, this is my story, and it's okay that I have this other identity. I'm getting kind of choked up, but that's how I feel, is that, I've lived this other life for so long, and now it's okay. It's okay. I can mesh these two, and that's going to have to be okay with the people that love me, and for the most part it is. For the most part it is, and those that it's too difficult with, that speaks more of them than of me, and everybody has their stuff and their issues. So I've had to learn to live with that.
I totally get it. I mean, I can keep drawing parallels all day. I so hear you. The second gen experience and the ex-Scientology experience, there's a lot of commonalities, a lot of milestones or similarities of experience that we have. That's all. I'll just put it that way.
Right. So I'm so happy that you do what you do, that there is the information getting out there, and that we're speaking our truths, to help people. So that's the bottom line, is if somebody hears the story and, they're trying to figure out what to do in Scientology, hopefully, this gives them that other side of the story and some perspective. And if they're suffering from sexual abuse, that they know that that's going to be a journey too, and that they're able to, to figure out how to deal with that. I mean, counseling is great. I've done tons of that. It helps. But at the end of the day, it's about forgiving too. And I have had to forgive my parents. I've had to forgive them. Or you live in that anger, and you don't want to live in that anger. Yeah, totally. I don't want to live in that, because that's just, it's so detrimental. It's so debilitating. It's just a really hard place to be. And so that was part of it. It was cathartic to get that out there and to say, even though I can write about how angry I was at my parents, when it was all happening, I can understand now where they were, and I can forgive them. It doesn't mean you forget it. You never forget it, but you can forgive it.
Absolutely. We have to come to our own places on that. There's no mountaintop that we're all supposed to get to. We got to get to our own mountaintop, whatever that is for us. And yet these tools that you've used and the story you've told here and some of the points you hit are things people can learn from and can apply, I hope, to themselves. I really want to encourage, for example, writing. You may not think of yourself as a writer. You may think of yourself as somebody who can't put two words together. That's okay, but it can still be a healing or therapeutic process for people to scribble stuff out. Just get it out of your head. And the more you do, sometimes that enables more to come out and more to come out. It doesn't, it's not for everybody, but if it's something that might help or something that could help you with your own story out there, that's a great tool. And there's other things, that counseling and communication and reflection and research and so many things you've done, as you've talked about here in these couple hours, that I think other people could learn from or maybe take a page from in their own recovery. And I know a lot of people who listen to my show have their own recovery journey that they're on. So that's one of the reasons I like sharing these stories and giving them to you folks out there, is because I think, that it's not just a salacious experience or an awful thing to listen to. It's something we can all learn from. That's my kick with all of this. So Pam, I want to thank you for taking all this time. I mean, you've done so much work on yourself, and then writing a book and getting it out there, and then coming up and doing this. Again, I will say it's courageous. It's not easy, but I really, really thank you for doing it.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much for having me on. And there's so many mental health places you can go, and mental health is not what it used to be. The stigma is not there anymore. Yep. And I think that's also what has helped me, and that it's okay. It's okay to speak this truth now. People are speaking all kinds of truths. And so this one is just one more, and it's not considered to be on the fringes so more, right now. it's considered like, yeah, you're dealing with that. Okay, let's help you.
Exactly. Where can people, your book is not published yet. It's on the line, right? Where can people reach out to you or reach you somehow? Is there a website? How do people contact you if they want to do so?
Okay. Yeah, I'm in the process of putting together a website. And so, I want to make sure that people know what that is. It'll be clearlyliesAreTrue.com. That's the name of the book. And there'll be a place for people to react to things that are posted off the podcast on there and any other interviews that I do. I've got a couple of others, lined up. And then once the book is released, it will go there too. So you'll be able to, keep abreast of that. So yeah, hopefully I would like people to connect. I would like to hear from others. I really would. If you have a connection, if you have a reaction, if you just want to share and, need some support.
Awesome. Well, you see it right there on the screen. I'm going to throw it up there when I put this together, and in the description section below here on YouTube or on where your audio podcast is being listened to. Check out that link. Check out Pam's work. And again, Pam, thank you very much for sharing all of this. I know it's not easy.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Okay, folks out there, I hope you found this entertaining, informative, and educational. That's always the point here. And thank you very much for listening and watching and supporting the channel and the show. I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.